Good morning, everyone. Sorry about that echo. My name is Kate. I'm from Hollard Health. This will be one of many of a series of wellness webinars that we will be hosting. This is the English webinar. Concurrently, we have a Portuguese and a French webinar going on, also about nutrition. We have 3 expert nutritionists and dietitians with us today to give you information on nutrition and debunking common nutrition myths. We all know how confusing nutrition can be, and we thought it would be a really, really nice way to kick off our wellness webinars with a topic that interests us all. And as part of Hollard Health's focus on preventative care and wellness, we thought this would be an appropriate thing to focus on. Thank you so much. Our English speaker is Lila Brooke. She is a dietitian from Johannesburg, specializes in medical legal expertise and corporate health, and she will be taking you through nutrition myths debunked today. Thank you. Over to you, Lila.
Thank you so much for that, Kate. I hope you can all hear me. So I'm very excited to be speaking to you all today about, as Kate was saying, a very important topic and a very pertinent topic for anybody who really cares about any aspect of their health, because nutrition ultimately affects so much. And I think it's a very exciting thing to be able to debunk a few myths, hopefully learn something new, and just have a better background and knowledge in terms of how to manage your health and nutrition the best way possible. So we are going to start off just in terms of an introduction as to what healthy food is, or what healthy food means. Because I think for a lot of people, there's so many different definitions and it can get quite overwhelming. So to break it down to the basics, a well-balanced diet means that you have a mix of the various macronutrients. So that incorporates carbohydrates, proteins, and fat, as well as the micronutrients, which incorporates vitamins and minerals. And these are what then provide the body with the essential nourishment that's needed. So when we refer to carbohydrates, that would be all the starchy foods. So that would be, say, rice, potatoes, pasta, quinoa, etc. Protein, the protein foods are fish, meat, chicken, legumes like beans, eggs, etc. And then fats would be things like your oil, avos, nuts, seeds, olive oil, etc. Whereas the vitamins and minerals, which obviously I'm sure that you've all heard of various vitamins before, but when it comes to the vitamins and minerals, we need those at a much smaller quantity than we do the macronutrients. And so therefore, that's why we have to have that balance between both the macro and the micronutrients accordingly. So ideally we want to try to include more minimally processed foods. So in other words, we want to have, say, fruit, vegetables, whole grains in their more natural form. We don't want to have, for example, fruit only made into fruit juice, or say, for example, processed meats that are made with then through a curing process and various preservatives added to it. We want to have them really in the more sort of natural state. When we're referring to healthy fats, that's referring to the unsaturated fats. So that would be referring to things like, once again, the olives, nuts, olive oil, nuts, and seeds as well. We will be talking more about that later. But the key thing is that ideally you want to really be eating the food in the state that's closest to how they were originally. You don't want them to have to go through a whole process where you're only getting potatoes in a packet of potato crisps, but rather in, say, the more natural form, like an actual potato. So that's the ideal, that your diet should be well balanced, but focusing on the foods in their sort of more natural state. So there are various variables that affect a healthy body and that would then affect the extent to which your diet would mean that you are healthy or less so than healthy. So dietary choices, obviously the food that you choose will affect whether your body is healthy, whether it's functioning optimally, whether you are lowering your risk of disease or managing any diseases that you may have. So ultimately diet is obviously the most, or one of the most important variables in this case. Physical activity is once again very important. So whatever the exercise may be, as long as it's something that you do enjoy, if you are exercising regularly, you can be sure that you are improving your overall health, not in terms of weight, which everybody always cares about, but also from the point of view of disease prevention, bone health, heart health, brain health. Really, exercise affects so much. So to include regular exercise into one's lifestyle is essential for a healthy body. So hydration is also important. That doesn't mean that you need to do all those little hydration sachets of electrolytes that have become very trendy recently. It really is about just making sure that you are drinking enough fluids in general and making sure that you replenish fluids sufficiently or correctly if you have been sort of very active, especially if it's a very hot day or in a hot environment. So hydration essentially relates to how much water you're having, but also the other fluids that you may be taking in, say, for example, soups or liquids that you get from foods like vegetables and fruit, obviously do contain fluids as well. Then sleep and stress management is very important for a healthy body. If one doesn't sleep correctly, it does have a direct effect on obviously your energy levels for the next day, but also affects hormonal changes, which in turn will affect how well your body copes with stress, how well you get through your day. And once again, on a sort of more long-term basis, chronic sleep deprivation can affect aging, brain health, also heart health. Once again, it affects weight as well. So various elements that come into it where sleep is so essential. Then with stress management, so obviously, yes, if you don't sleep enough, you're more likely to feel more stressed as well. But chronic stress, be it emotional stress or whether it's physical stress, it can also affect our health long term as well. So it's important to manage stress, improve sleep to really optimize what would be considered a healthy body. Gut health, that certainly has gotten a lot of attention recently. So there's been more and more research that has come out over the last couple of years in terms of the importance of gut health, how to best eat to improve gut health, as well as how small little changes in our lifestyle can positively and negatively affect that as well. So good gut health has been linked to not only good digestion, but also, once again, heart health, in terms of brain health as well. So, for example, serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter that's very involved with us feeling sort of calm and relaxed, that there's more receptors in the gut for serotonin than there are in the brain. So that whole concept of a gut feeling really does apply in terms of that if our serotonin levels are well balanced, we feel better and are more relaxed, and our gut health being optimized is important for that. And that comes down to making sure that one has a balanced diet, but also including foods that promote gut health and improve then our overall digestion and well-being. So things like probiotics, I know are very popular, having enough fiber in one's diet, avoiding sort of foods that are not so good for gut health. So once again, the processed foods, and really it's sort of a holistic look at things when it comes to gut health. So the first myth that we hopefully will debunk is that all carbs are bad for you if you're trying to lose weight. So I'm sure that everybody listening has got their own opinion on that and probably their own personal experience on that if they've ever tried to lose weight and have tried to address their carbohydrate intake to look at that as well. So it's very, very misleading. I know there's so much, as I said, there's so much really noise around nutrition that we are all surrounded with on a daily basis, whether it's through advertising, whether it's through social media, whether it's just through friends and their personal experience and their anecdotal situations. And it can be very confusing. And when it comes to carbs, rather, that it's important to remember that carbs are not all equal, in that carbohydrates are classified into simple and complex carbohydrates. So your simple carbohydrates are your sort of typical sugars. So that would be things like the sugar you're adding to your food, or say, for example, honey. And honey, yes, is not much better than sugar, sorry to say. Whereas the complex carbohydrates, those would be the foods that are higher in fiber and starch. So for example, if we're thinking about carbohydrates solely as, okay, well, I'm adding a lot of sugar to my tea, and therefore I need to cut down on that sugar in order to lose weight, then yes, that does make sense. But if we then are sort of painting all carbohydrates with the same brush and then avoiding, say, the more complex carbohydrates that will provide more fiber, then we are losing out on those benefits as well. So the complex carbohydrates would be things like, for example, brown rice, seed breads, oats, So those foods which are less refined forms of starch, but have that additional benefit of providing fiber and providing more vitamins and minerals, whereas simple carbohydrates really don't have as much nutritional value and provide more sort of empty calories, as it's called, where it gives you calories but not much vitamins, minerals, other nutritional value. And so therefore, depending on the type of carbohydrate, it will affect the extent to which it affects the way your body functions. It's important to bear in mind that carbohydrates are our primary energy source. So we really do need carbohydrates to fuel the brain optimally, as well as the muscles, and to provide the necessary energy for our essential body functions. So because carbohydrates are the main source of glucose in the body, and a lot of people think that glucose is something that needs to be lowered as much as possible, and it's almost a bad thing, as it were. Really, glucose is our fuel. Just like we need to kind of fuel our car correctly, we need to make sure that we're fueling our brain and the rest of our body as well. So if you are not having enough glucose in your body, then that is just as bad as too much. You do get glucose from other sources, from protein and fat, but it's a much longer process in terms of how long it takes for those foods to be broken down, and therefore a greater chance that you are going to not get the optimal energy or as quick source of energy as if you're cutting out, unless you are having the carbohydrates sufficiently. So carbohydrates are not necessarily firstly all bad, and certainly they have an important role to play. They do have many positive functions in the body. It's also about quality over quantity, and this is important to bear in mind once again from a weight point of view, but overall health as well, that although the carbohydrates do have a role to play, we do have to make sure it's the best possible carbohydrate sources. And we're not choosing, say, for example, white bread and white rice and all of those sorts of foods, but rather choosing the brown bread, the seed or rye bread, the quinoa, the sweet potatoes, all of these sources that will give us fiber, will give us more vitamins and mineral. So, I mean, also because the fiber is important for digestion, but it also makes you feel more full as well. So if we do have enough fiber in our diet, that improves weight loss as well. So by having those carbohydrates that help to also provide that fiber, it also improves then how full you feel, how balanced your blood sugar levels are, and therefore in turn can actually help with weight loss. Whereas if we're having a lot of refined carbohydrates, so all the white flour cakes and breads and sugary foods, we're not going to feel as satisfied with those meals. We're not going to have the fiber, which makes us full. We can have more of a fluctuation in our blood sugar levels where the blood sugar is rising, falling very dramatically. And we're not going to get then that full, more satiated feeling as much from a meal, which in turn will mean more food intake, more of a chance of weight gain, and also then a poorer sort of blood sugar balance as well. So certainly choosing the right kinds of carbohydrates is important, and obviously watching in terms of having the right balance on your plate, essentially. So also the glycemic index is an important factor. So when it comes to glycemic index, it might have been something that you've heard of before. It's essentially the extent to which whatever food you have, and it's usually referring to carbohydrate-based foods, whatever food you have, the extent to which it affects your blood sugar. So I did just mention that certain carbohydrates can cause quite a sharp rise and fall in your blood sugar, which in turn means that you'll feel hungrier quickly, you're more likely to make poorer food choices, you're more likely to have more cravings. Whereas low GI carbohydrates cause a slower, sort of more stable increase in your blood sugar where you don't get these huge fluctuations. And in turn, that means that your energy levels are more stable, you have less cravings. And from a hormonal point of view, it's much better as well. Because if you're choosing more of the low GI carbohydrates, the slower, smaller increase in your blood sugar also causes a smaller increase in your insulin levels. And insulin, obviously, is related to, in terms of diabetes, that if someone is diabetic, they need to make sure that they're having enough insulin or the insulin works correctly. But even in someone who's not diabetic, a sharp increase in their blood sugar will also cause the insulin to rise quite significantly too. And these increases in insulin also predispose one to more fat storage. So essentially then, if you're choosing more of the low GI carbohydrates, you're going to have better energy levels, reduced cravings, better concentration as well, and better weight loss if that is a focus as well. So the low GI carbs, as you can see, they include things like oats, quinoa, brown rice, seed bread, sweet potatoes, If you're choosing normal potatoes, it's always better to have the little baby potatoes because those do have a lower glycemic index. But overall, if you are keeping to more of the less refined options and keep to less refined options and more of the unrefined options, then that would be ideal from that point of view. So also from a scientific study point of view, it can be very easy to kind of fall into this trap where everybody is always doing keto and they are, so by following more of a ketogenic diet, they end up then eliminating carbohydrates as much as possible, having more protein and fat and green vegetables. And it can be easy to think that's the only way to really manage one's health and to make the best possible choices. Whereas really what is important is to look at having the right amount of carbohydrates, so not to have an excessive amount, to really choose more of those more unrefined whole food sources of carbohydrates, and to then in turn, by doing that, it does help to improve fat loss potentially and in general your metabolic health, which is important. So in terms of some good carb choices for weight loss, so whole grains, as I mentioned, quinoa, brown rice, oats, barley as well, incidentally. So quinoa, I know a lot of people feel a bit nervous in terms of how to cook it, but barley is also a very versatile grain, which can be used just as well, just as easily as quinoa. Then legumes, so that would be your lentils, chickpeas, beans. They all are good sources of carbohydrates. They have a very low GI. They have the added benefit in that the type of fiber that's in the legumes are very good for cholesterol levels, help to lower your cholesterol levels naturally. And so therefore the legumes are a very good one to include. Vegetables, so whatever vegetables it may be. Some people feel a bit hesitant or nervous to include vegetables like, say, butternut or pumpkin or beetroot because they're concerned about the additional sort of higher carbohydrate intake in those. But the truth is that from a weight point of view, I've never had anyone actually gain weight from eating pumpkin. And the benefits of having a large variety of vegetables, including a good variety of vegetables, is so key in terms of overall health, in terms of fiber intake, and also just in terms of making sure that you're getting the right nutrients in. So don't be scared to have any vegetables, essentially, whatever vegetables you enjoy. And obviously to make sure that when you prepare the vegetables, they're not boiled until there's nothing left, but rather ideally steamed, stir-fried, roasted also is fine, but just boiling is not the best in terms of cooking method. In terms of fruit, so when it comes to fruit, for a lot of people also they're a bit nervous when it comes to fruit if they're trying to lose weight or even if they're not trying to lose weight, but especially for weight loss. Ultimately, it comes down to once again portion size, and it's important to look at not only how much fruit you're having over the course of the day, but also how much you're having at once. So things like, for example, if you're having berries, apples, stone fruit like the peaches, nectarines, etc., all of those are great choices of fruits. They all have a place in your diet. They all have many health benefits in terms of vitamins and minerals. But ideally, you shouldn't have a massive bowl of fruit salad, for example, at once. You want to keep it to the equivalent of, like, say, 1/2 to 1 cup of fruit salad at a time, or maximum 2 fruits, like 2 apples or 1 orange, 1 peach. But having a large amount of fruit at one time can cause a sharp increase in your blood sugar as well, which in turn then comes back to the problem in terms of insulin release as well. So those carbs that we want to try to limit or avoid, that includes refined grains, so white bread, pastries, processed cereals, biscuits, all of those sorts of foods made from white flour, essentially. And with all of these sorts of foods, it's not to say you can never have them ever again, but it's the place that they have in your diet where if majority of the time you're choosing the better choices, that's fine. And if once every second week you're having a pastry, it's also okay. I wouldn't want you to feel this complete guilt if you do have those foods, but it's the overall intake of these foods that's the issue. Sugary drinks and snacks, so all the soda, fizzy drinks, the flavored yogurts, candies, etc., all of those that have a high sugar content would be something you want to limit or avoid. So if you're choosing sparkling water as opposed to, say, like a regular soda, if you are choosing, say, to have a yogurt that's a plain yogurt rather than a sweetened yogurt, that is always preferable. So if it's a sort of a conscious choice to make those better choices within your daily diet, then once again, an occasional treat is fine. It's just important to also understand for you what occasional means and whether occasional means once every few weeks or once a few times an hour. So to just put in perspective in terms of how much of those foods you have, especially if you're trying to lose weight, but just once again for overall health, the high sugar foods are something you need to really be cautious of. So in terms of some good alternatives, so a good one to replace white rice with would be brown rice or quinoa, or as I mentioned, barley is also a good alternative. You can also have bulgur wheat, that also would work. But the white rice itself, you want to try to limit. Incidentally, basmati rice is a little bit better than other normal white rices from a glycemic index point of view, but it still won't have as much fiber as, say, brown rice. So brown rice is still preferable. In terms of sugary cereals, so all of those, I generally always say that if your box of cereal has got a cartoon animal on the front, that is not the best choice. And those, let's face it, are generally the sugary cereals. It'd be better to choose something like an oats with berries, or if you want to have something that's more of a cereal, then something that's more bran-based would be preferable. Otherwise, there's also many cereals on the market that do have a reduced sugar content, but the oats will be preferable because once again, that'll be less refined. And obviously you can then adjust what goes in it as opposed to a pre-made cereal where you don't have as much choice. On that point, just be careful with mueslis or granolas. Often they add a lot of extra sugar and fat. So they might add a lot of honey, syrup, oil, etc., which is what gives it those little clusters, but in turn obviously does raise the sugar and fat content quite significantly, especially for those who are trying to lose weight. In terms of white bread, a good substitute would be more of a whole grain or whole wheat bread or 100% rye bread. Sourdough bread is also a good option, which has sort of risen in popularity recently as well. So that's also a good choice. Soda, so any sort of fizzy drinks, it's a good one to replace would be with a water that you put overnight, like in a jug of water, or some cucumber slices or strawberry slices, or some herbal tea also works, but just to limit the sugary drinks. And just remember that carbs are not the enemy. It's about choosing the right ones in the right amounts that can support weight loss and overall health overall. In terms of protein, so this also is something that a lot of people are a bit unsure about. So our second myth is proteins build muscle and you can eat an unlimited amount of protein if you're trying to lose weight. So there's this general idea that when it comes to protein, that no matter how much protein you have, the calories in protein doesn't count, which is not quite the case. But if we look at specifically the functions of protein, we need it for muscle repair, to maintain lean mass, to maintain muscle essentially, and also to promote satiety. So if you have enough protein in a meal, it keeps you feeling more full, which is obviously very important. So in terms of the amount of protein we need, so if someone is very much sedentary, does no exercise, the general recommended daily allowance is 0.8 to 1 gram of protein of 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. Whereas if we look at someone who is more athletic or someone who's trying to gain muscle, then it'll be more 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram per day. I would say that most people would actually fall into this category, that even if you're not sort of a super athlete, most people are trying to maintain or improve muscle or to make sure that they're preventing muscle loss. So going up to about 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram per day would probably be suitable for most people. But if someone really is completely sedentary, then the 0.8 to 1 gram is sufficient. From a weight loss point of view as well, if we have enough protein, it helps to preserve muscle mass and prevents the yo-yo effect. If you are trying to lose weight and constantly find you losing or regaining weight, the protein is important because if we don't have enough muscle, our metabolic rate slows down. And that's one of the reasons why if you do very extreme diets, you land up yo-yoing because your muscle loss that happens as the issue. So in terms of how to incorporate enough protein, so both animal and plant-based proteins have a role to play. Animal sources of protein would be our lean meats, so like beef, chicken, pork, as well as fish, eggs, dairy products. The plant-based sources of protein would be legumes, tofu, quinoa, nuts, and seeds. So legumes, once again, would be your beans, lentils, chickpeas. That and the tofu, they do have a much higher protein content than, say, something like the quinoa, the nuts, or the seeds. But all of those in that lineup, they do contain plant-based protein. So in terms of some practical examples to make sure that you are getting enough protein, something like Greek yogurt with chia seeds and dried fruit would be a great breakfast option. A snack could be some almonds and a piece of cheese. Then for lunch could be something like, say, lentils with roasted vegetables with oil for roasting purposes. And the key really is ultimately to make sure that you're having that balance between the proteins, the carbs, and the fat. So it's key when it comes to the protein that ultimately calories are calories if you're trying to lose weight, and an excess of calories from protein will still be stored as fat, even if it comes from a protein source. So ultimately, it's about having the right amount, and that is important. Moving on to the third myth, detox cures are necessary to eliminate toxins and juicing is good for you. So this is always a little bit of sort of a minefield, especially after a period of time when people have overindulged. For example, after the festive season, I find that everybody starts buying a juicer and starts juicing up anything they can find. So firstly, just in terms of the liver, so our liver naturally, it's one of its main roles is to actually detoxify the body. That is its job. So our body is able to cleanse itself. So it's not necessary to actively detox in order to allow that to happen. In addition to that, the liver, other than the liver, the kidneys and the intestines are also involved with detoxing and eliminating those toxins from our bodies. And even our skin, actually, we lose some toxins from our skin through sweat. So really, it's not necessarily necessary to plan to detoxify in that way. And it's far better to make sure that our diet is more varied, that we're not trying to be overly restrictive in terms of our food choices. And in that way, making sure that we don't necessarily even have to consider these sorts of restrictive detoxification programs. Most of these juicing diets, which someone will do, where they will literally only have juice or maybe soups as well for a week or two, they're very, very hard to sustain and they basically don't serve much purpose. You feel a bit better. Obviously, you're going to feel very virtuous if you've cut out all those foods which you know aren't ideal. But the problem is with the juicing is that after that juicing period finishes, you will just be ravenous. You will most likely eat everything you can find. And also to bear in mind that when you're juicing the fruits and vegetables, you are losing out on the fiber content, which is really important. The ideal really from a balanced diet is the Mediterranean diet, because that has been scientifically proven to support liver and overall metabolic health as well. So that would mean that you're focusing more on nuts, seeds, fish, whole grains, rather than focusing on cutting out food groups. So the key here that we really want to think about is that detox cures are not necessary and healthy habits are much more important. A concern for me always with detox diets, and as I said, they do tend to be quite popular, is that there's this tendency towards people choosing to rely on detoxification or detox diets as opposed to having a balance in their diet sort of all year round or, whatever it may be in terms of why they're choosing to juice. And then it almost gives one a license to make worse food choices because there's this idea, well, I can just go on a juice fast or just kind of cut out various foods that only have cabbage soup or whatever it may be for a period of time. So it then removes sort of that ideal where someone is trying to have a balanced diet every single day and rather shifting to these quick fixes. And ultimately, when it comes to a balanced diet, it's got to be something that's sustainable and it's got to be something that you do every day, no matter where you are, no matter what time of year it is. Obviously, there'll be variations and there'll be treats here and there, but then they need to have their place rather than something that maybe is a very, very significant period of overindulgence and then the sort of juicing period thereafter. So either way, we do not need to detox. It's not necessary. It's more important to make sure that you have healthy eating habits, and that is what is important. When we think about plant-based foods, so those would be foods mainly based, the key is really to make sure that one takes into account the effect that it has on overall health, and certainly it does support liver health and gut health as well. So in terms of the fiber and the antioxidants that are in those foods, they help in terms of that support. Antioxidants are compounds that are found in mainly fruits and vegetables, which help to prevent damage or to sort of neutralize potentially damaging components in the body that can affect say, our heart health, our gut health, overall sort of immune function as well. So we do get those foods that have very much a protective effect in terms of managing health overall, but once again, especially to support our natural body's detoxification. So cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, those vegetables are all very good for improving and enhancing detoxification. Whereas at the same time, the other foods, as you can see here, berries, nuts, legumes, olive oil, those also help to improve detoxification, but more in a different way through the antioxidant content. So if you're including a very varied diet, but especially including enough vegetables and including especially more of those cruciferous vegetables, then that will help to improve and enhance your detoxification. So in terms of what would be considered enough vegetables, that would be things like, say, like half your plate being vegetables, ideally, or even, I know this is going to sound like a lot, but ideally about 600 grams of vegetables a day. I know, it sounds like a lot. So you can build up to it, even if you are gradually getting there, but ideally aim for half your plate being vegetables at lunch and the same for dinner. And if you are having then enough of these plant-based foods, it helps to reduce inflammation, it improves digestion, supports heart health, and really just overall body health as well. So just from an all over sort of global point of view, it is so important. So the key is really to not focus on detoxes, to focus on a healthy daily balance, including enough of the plant-based foods and healthy fats, and specifically to try to really oomph up the amount of vegetables that you have, trying to get to that about 600 grams a day, ideally, or trying to get a minimum of half your plate being vegetables at lunch and dinner, and trying to also include a variety of vegetables is very important. Don't have the same 3 vegetables every day, getting a variety of vegetables in, preparing them in an enjoyable way, and getting enough in terms of the actual quantity. So myth 4 is, are all sugars created equal? So this is something that I'm sure that you have all been kind of confronted with on a very regular basis and can get very, very confusing and overwhelming as well, because when it comes to all the various kinds of sugars, it seems like honey should be better than sugar. It seems that if we are choosing something that is less refined, it must be a better option. But ultimately, it's a case that sugar is sugar. Whether it's from your maple syrup, whether it's from raw honey, whether it's coconut sugar, ultimately, sugar is sugar and it will get processed in the body to glucose. Yes, there are some additional health benefits. If we look at something like raw honey, it has antibacterial properties. Maple syrup also has been found to have similar healthy properties in that respect. But if we talk about the effect on your blood sugar, if we're talking about the calorie content, if we're talking about, say, for example, someone who's diabetic and is trying to choose the best option to sweeten their tea, for example, there's not going to be any additional benefit to choosing coconut sugar over your regular sort of table sugar. So it may seem healthier, but ultimately it won't make much more of a difference. So if you, incidentally, on the point of the honey, if you're choosing normal commercial honey, not a raw honey, that actually has a higher glycemic index and therefore a higher or a more extreme effect on your blood sugar in terms of blood sugar increase than your normal table sugar would, as opposed to, say, raw honey, which is a little bit better than regular sugar, but is still going to have an effect on your blood sugar as well. It's not going to do nothing. So there's often, I often see recipes where it'll say, no refined sugars. Okay, great, but they've added a bottle of maple syrup. So it's still going to have an effect on your blood sugar, even if it's not your normal kind of syrup. So ultimately, sugar is sugar. So an advantage or a better approach would be to think about how to reduce those sugar cravings by getting used to less sweet tastes. So to try as much as possible to use a little bit less sugar in your tea, for example, to try to gravitate more towards, say, for example, a fruit rather than a chocolate. So you're getting sort of a healthier amount of fruit sugar in that case, but you're moving away from having sugar as something that you include too often or too regularly. So myth 5, as you can see here, is that supplements are essential for health, or are they essential for health, or are they a waste of money? So this is something that I think there's varying opinions on that, and I really do think it depends on the situation and the person and their individual needs. So one certainly can't say that all supplements are bad or all supplements are good. It depends on why the person is using them. So And I do find that, I mean, obviously the supplement market is very big, it's very misleading. You just need to take a walk through the supplement section of any pharmacy, and it is absolutely crazy how many supplements there are. At the pharmacy near me, they literally have, I think it's 2 full, very long aisles just of supplements. And if someone is just looking for even something as simple as a calcium supplement, for example, it's very, very overwhelming and very hard to know what to choose or what one needs at all. In general, your first port of call is always to have a balanced diet. You can't rely on a supplement and think that that is better than having those actual nutrients in your diet. It'll always be better to get omega-3s from a piece of fish than to take it in a supplement form. So, for example, or even say if you're choosing, say, something like iron, you're better off having that iron from a steak than having it from a supplement. But a supplement is, by its name, supplementary. It should be supplementary to a balanced diet. And specific people, depending on the individual, will need different supplements or may need different supplements depending on their diet. So, for example, a pregnant woman will need to take the prenatal vitamins. She will need to take folate. Those are important in terms of the health of the baby and in terms of her health as well during pregnancy. So that would be really, really essential. Folate during pregnancy is very, very important to prevent spina bifida in pregnant women, and really should be something that should be taken pre-conception as well. Someone who's vegan, because if they're vegan, they won't be having any animal products, they won't be having eggs or dairy either, and therefore they're missing out on those nutrients you would usually get from those animal proteins. So they then may need to supplement with vitamin B12, iron. They may need also additional protein supplements as well, but that will still depend on the individual, because there are those vegan people who may be, well, in many cases, are able to balance their diet well enough that they don't necessarily need supplements. So it really does depend on the person. Also, if someone has very, very little sun exposure, they may then need additional vitamin D as well. So vitamin D we get from the sun, and a lot of people will, even if we do get a lot of sun exposure, may still need additional vitamin D. I would say that majority of people, when I test their vitamin D levels, they have low vitamin D, because even though we may be exposed to the vitamin D from the sun, unless we're actually getting enough sun exposure in terms of direct sun exposure outside with enough skin exposed at the right time of day, it's actually very, very hard to get the vitamin D in. There's apps that are available if you search for it, where you can actually put in your location, your previous vitamin D level if you've got the blood result reading, and it will then calculate based on today's cloud cover, today's temperature, how much vitamin D you personally need. So it's just something to look for. It's actually really, really amazing, and just really helps to clarify how much vitamin D do I need? Have I got enough? Otherwise, sometimes supplementation is necessary. And then I've just got here, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And that is the case with virtually anything in life, really. Virtually anything in nutrition, but especially when it comes to supplements. Because with supplements, there's so many on the market which claim to basically change your life in one little pill. And for the most part, nothing's going to replace a good balanced diet. And for the most part as well, many of these claims are not always founded. So it's important to just always look at these sorts of things from the right sort of point of view, or a pinch of sodium, but to make sure that you're just kind of putting in perspective in terms of what your individual needs are, and that you're not wasting money and time and effort on taking a supplement that you most likely don't need. So myth 6 that we've got here is that butter, eggs, and full-fat dairy don't affect cholesterol. This I know is also a little bit of a minefield as well. There's so much information and so much sort of conflicting information, it can get a bit overwhelming. Ultimately, cholesterol is a lipid or a fat that we need in our body for cell function, for hormones, for digestion. It really is so important. We don't want to have no cholesterol. However, we have the LDL cholesterol, which you might have heard of, which is the bad cholesterol. If we have too much of the LDL, it can contribute to heart disease. Whereas at the same time, we have the HDL, which is considered to be the good cholesterol, because it actually helps to remove the excess cholesterol in our blood from the bloodstream and allows it to be broken down and processed by the liver. So it's a case of that you want to balance the amount of good cholesterol versus the bad cholesterol, as well as looking at the dietary cholesterol that you're getting in the food you eat versus the cholesterol that is naturally produced in your body as well. So obviously the body can regulate how much of the cholesterol needs to be produced based on how much you are taking in. So eggs are something that that's recently, probably as like 5-10 years ago, it was always said that you really need to avoid eggs for cholesterol levels due to their cholesterol content. So in general, one yolk of eggs, assuming it's sort of like a large to extra large size egg, one yolk would have about 250 milligrams of cholesterol, whereas we need about, say, 300 to 400 milligrams of cholesterol a day. Having said that, if you have one yolk a day, you will be fine from a cholesterol point of view. And the question is then, but also, does the cholesterol from the egg have an effect at all on blood cholesterol? I have found in my practice that there's a variety in terms of how people respond to the cholesterol from eggs. Some people it makes a difference to reduce that egg cholesterol. Some people it doesn't make a difference. So it really does depend on the individual, but either way, one yolk a day is safe. In terms of just on that point, so the egg whites you're not limited on, but just specifically the yolks you are. So if you've got a dog, you can give the extra yolks to the dog. It's very good for their coats. Butter and full-fat dairy, those contain saturated fats, but recent studies suggest the effect on cholesterol and heart disease is complex. So once again, there's varying results, varying views, and ultimately it depends on the individual and how they personally respond to those foods. So the best is to always try to pair eggs with vegetables instead of processed meats. This allows for better absorption in general of the vitamins and minerals, but also helps to improve cholesterol absorption because the fiber in the vegetables helps to prevent excess cholesterol from being absorbed. Butter, you want to try to use in moderation, but try to choose the better sources like the grass-fed butter, which has more nutritional value. It has more vitamin A, which is important for eye health and general skin health. Full-fat dairy, if you're going to have full-fat dairy, try to choose those options that are less processed, like a plain Greek yogurt, as opposed to one that's sort of got extra sugar and extra little chocolate balls added and all of those. And the same goes for the cheese, to rather have the unprocessed rather than processed cheese. Things to avoid, so the ultra processed foods that are high in trans fats. So trans fats are fats that are formed from over processing of oils, so things like margarine and processed pastries like general ones you'd get from like a supermarket. And also to avoid having an excess of fat, but especially these ones high in saturated fat, without the rest of your diet being in the correct balance. So it'd be a good idea to have, in terms of some sort of healthy changes, scrambled eggs with avocado instead of sugary cereals, using olive oil and butter instead of margarine for cooking, especially if it's a brick margarine, the hard ones that come in a block. The olive oil is certainly a much better option. To choose plain Greek yogurt over the flavored versions. And to bear in mind that you don't necessarily always automatically have an increase in cholesterol from these foods. It really does depend on the individual person, and ultimately to make sure that your diet is balanced. So in conclusion, the ideal is to always focus on minimally processed foods, so to choose more fresh fruit, vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, legumes, nuts, and healthy fats. So in that way, we're getting more of the fiber, we're getting more antioxidants, we're getting more phytonutrients, which are chemicals that are found in fruits and vegetables, which also help to prevent disease, and just to get enough vitamins and minerals in general. In addition, ultimately, moderation, variety, and balance are key when it comes to healthy eating. It really does depend on the individual. We're trying to get a balance in terms of the amount of the various food components. You can see in this image, incidentally, on the right here, that this is the plate model, that ideally sort of ideally half or close to half of your plate should be vegetables. Approximately a quarter of the plate should be the starch, and approximately a quarter should be the protein. This view over here shows also in terms of the amount of fat as well, that you want to have fat included to small amounts as well. And those sorts of sugary foods should be something that isn't included often at all. So ultimately, balance in terms of majority of your plate being vegetables and small amounts of starch and the correct amount of protein. Another way to look at the amount of protein you need is to look at your palm. Ideally, your protein portion should be approximately about the size of your palm, especially red meat, sort of the size of the actual palm, and then fish and chicken, you can have a bigger portion, sort of like the whole hand's palm, as it were. And ultimately, it's got to be that whatever eating habits that you are following, that it's sustainable and that allows for really optimal health and well-being. So that is from me. Any questions that any of you have that you would like to ask?
Lila, I see that there's some questions in the chat.
Okay, great. Let me
specifically about sugar
Sure.
and pregnancy.
Sure. Okay, so the first question here is, how can I enjoy a fulfilling and healthy meal that is both nutritious and satisfying? So what always comes down to that is fiber, that if you're having a sufficient fiber content in your diet, that really does help to make the meal more satisfying. Also making sure that you have enough variety. If your meals are the same, you'll get very bored and it'll be very hard to sustain. And in addition to that, also to make sure that you're getting enough of the protein as well, because that will also help to make the meal more satisfying. But add more herbs, more spices, more flavors, just to oomph up the interest part of the meal and make it more enjoyable as well. So yes, and your next question there, Donia, is there an ideal percentage distribution on a plate for a balanced meal containing protein, vegetables, and carbohydrates? So yes, ideally half your plate should be vegetables, a quarter starch, and a quarter protein. So that's the ideal distribution. Is stevia considered a better sugar option? Yes, it is better. It is a sweetener that has been found to have very sort of low risk of any potential side effects, that it doesn't necessarily have a problem in terms of negative health outcomes. A lot of people struggle with the taste because it has got a little bit of a different aftertaste, but stevia would be a better choice. It is important to bear in mind that if you're getting stevia in a sachet form, often it's mixed with other sweeteners. It's not plain stevia. So plain stevia is usually found in a liquid form in a drop that you would then drop into the food. And that would be something that you'd want to then have just to watch the sweetness, because it's very easy to ramp up quite quickly, but it would be a good option. Then Benedict, you asked us, replacing sugar with honey really help in losing weight or diabetes management? So replacing the sugar with honey would definitely not help in terms of weight loss, because ultimately the calories will be the same and the effect on your blood sugar will also not be sort of lower to an extent that it would allow for less cravings or better blood sugar levels or lower insulin production. Similarly, in terms of diabetes management, I wouldn't recommend the honey over the sugar. Even if it's raw honey, it's not such a difference that it really, really helps you. From a diabetes point of view, it's better to obviously first prize to cut out the sugar altogether, or otherwise to have very, very small amounts of sugar, like half a teaspoon of sugar in a cup of tea or coffee, but then to make sure that when you are having something that has a bit of sugar in it, you're not having on its own. You're having it with a meal that contains fiber and protein, which will help to improve your blood sugar response. So if you're having your cup of tea, but you're also having it with a chicken salad, that would be a lot better as an option. Is granola classified as processed cereals? Often it is. It depends on the granola. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of sugar and fat very often, so it's not ideal from that point of view, unless you make it yourself and you can choose what goes in it, and you can be very sort of careful with that. Then Jania, I hope I pronounced your name right. You asked what dietary modifications beyond supplementation are recommended during pregnancy. So during pregnancy, you need to make sure, especially that you're having enough calcium, enough protein, enough of the natural food sources of things like folic acid. So green leafy vegetables like broccoli, spinach. You also want to make sure that if for those women who are experiencing morning sickness, that you try to do small frequent meals, and you try to also try to have things like, for example, like cream crackers or rice cakes help to settle the stomach. Ginger helps as well. And then to avoid undercooked meats, any milk that's unpasteurized, any sort of cold meats, or sort of lunch meats or processed meats, like things like polonies, because those can cause contamination from a food illness point of view. And to also make sure that you avoid liver. So whether it's chicken liver or calf liver, whatever it is, the levels of vitamin A are very, very high in that, and it's very important to watch how much of that you have. So just to be cautious of that. Because it can actually be damaging to the baby if you have too much vitamin A. What are quick healthy meal ideas for someone with limited cooking time? One of my favorite quick meal ideas is a oven stir fry. So you get sort of those stir fry vegetable mixes where the vegetables are sort of pre-chopped from the supermarket. You mix that with a bit of soy sauce, a bit of oil, whichever oil you're going to be using, and then you put that on a baking tray on baking paper, and then you put it in the oven. I'm not sure if everyone, which sort of temperature gauge people use, so I'm not sure Fahrenheit, but it would be about 220 degrees, and then you would keep, or 200, and then you would cook that at that temperature until everything's crispy. And instead of getting soggy stir fry, you get little nice crispy bits. You don't have to stand and stir it, and you can also cook your protein part with that separately as well, like cut up some raw chicken breast, toss in a bit of soy sauce and oil as well, and put that on a separate baking tray in case it cooks at separate rates. And you don't have to have then any standing and stirring. You can put the stuff in the oven and walk away, and it's easy, and you can do something else. But that's a very, very convenient option as well. It's something I do very often. Then Alda, you asked, is this true that it's not advisable to eat avocado at night? There's no problem with avocado at night, so that's not an issue. Avocado is a very good source of healthy fats. You just want to be careful in terms of how many you have. You don't want to have an excessive amount if you're trying to lose weight, but avocado is a good option. So Joan, you asked the tool you mentioned to check if you're getting enough sun exposure or vitamin D. The app is called, so actually mentioned earlier, the app is called D Minder. So the letter D, Minder. Janeth, you asked, what's the amount of carbs should a person take per day? So the amount of carbs that you would need would really vary from person to person. It will depend on how active you are, your goals, your specific dietary needs in terms of whether you've got any medical conditions. So there isn't a set amount of carbs. It will depend on the person. So say, for example, someone who's trying to lose weight, say a woman of, say, sort of average height is probably about 165 meters tall, would probably need about 150, maybe 200 grams of carbs a day. But that's a very rough estimate depending on the person. So everybody will be different. Ideally, if you keep into a quarter of your plate being carbs, that's probably the best indication. And then Naftali, I hope I pronounced your name right. Did I miss your presentation on salt, or was there none? So we didn't go into salt specifically, but when it comes to salt, you want to watch the amount that you're having. I always recommend not shaking the salt cellar more than, say, twice, and also watching how much extra salt you have in sauces. So things like cook-in sauces, marinades, sort of salty spice mixes, because that does obviously then add up quite a lot, especially if you have high blood pressure. But in general, from overall health, it's important just to watch your overall salt intake. Then Lillian, I think it is failure to eat at night, then, oh, sorry, just a bit. Failure to help at night, does help in losing weight. So I think you're asking, is it, if you don't eat at night, is it better for weight loss? It's not necessarily always better for weight loss for everybody. It's more a case of that you want to make sure that the timing of your meals would be related to you specifically in terms of your specific needs. For some people, they find that it's easier for them to eat early in the day and finish early in the day, which is fine. But if you're going to try to not eat at night and then you land up potentially even binging because you're trying to not eat and then you land up overeating, then obviously that's not ideal. So it's more a case of making sure that you're getting the balance in during the day and getting enough calories in correctly for whatever your needs are. But you don't necessarily need to not eat at night to lose weight. You should, however, keep to a lighter meal at night. Then is it necessary to have 3 meals a day, or should we listen to our bodies and nourish our bodies with this in mind? So I think this very much depends on the person. So for some people, having that structure of 3 meals a day does help them just to stay on track better, to have a better idea in terms of that they've gotten the nutrients they need, and prevents them from maybe having like extra snacks or extra sort of little foods creeping in at a later stage. Whereas there are those people that do best to really listen to their bodies and kind of make the best choices accordingly. I think the best is a combination of both, that you do have some sort of regular meal structure, but you still are listening to your body in terms of potentially the timing of the meal or the quantity of food. So you might go, okay, it's lunchtime and I've got a chicken salad. I'm not going to have this chicken salad right now. I'm not that hungry yet. I'm going to wait half an hour or an hour. Or you could, in theory, say, okay, well, I'm not going to finish the whole thing because I don't feel I need it. I maybe feel full after half, and then you don't force yourself to finish it. So really, there's got to be a balance of both, and listen to your body, and obviously making better choices within that. So not to listen to your body, but end up having chocolate cake. So to still make good choices. Then Patricia, you asked, does milk contribute to immune diseases? If so, is it I think you're saying the lactose in the milk? So milk itself does not necessarily contribute to immune diseases. I'm not sure which immune diseases you mean. Maybe if you can just clarify in the chat. So I'll come back to that one. So if you just let me know. And then does green tea help manage cholesterol levels? It can help in general with heart health. So green tea has been found to be linked to many health benefits, including dental health, including disease prevention. They did a study which found that 10 cups of green tea a day, I know it's a lot, that it lowers the risk of prostate cancer quite significantly. So green tea does have many health benefits. So something that if you can include, that's great, not only potentially for heart health, but in general for overall health. Then Adorito, you asked, considering one trains in the morning and fasted, so just coffee and water and some sort of banana, and doesn't eat simple carbs in breakfast and lunch, is okay to have simple carbs in the evening/night to help fuel the morning workouts. So where the simple carbs, so they're the sort of more like higher sugar foods, where they sort of have a purpose, or where the advantage would be the most would be if you're doing endurance exercise, like long distance running. It would be ideal for sort of during the workout or directly afterwards when you're trying to replenish your glucose levels. If you have the simple carbs in the evening, it's not going to necessarily help to fuel your morning workouts more than the complex carbs would. So it won't necessarily be an additional benefit. But I think if we're talking about that training on the fasted versus unfasted state point of view, some people do better not eating before they train in the morning. Some do better if they have fasted. So that does depend on the individual. Particularly if you've had a banana, it's not fasting though. But either way, it's important to go with what works for you and to make sure your meal the night before is something that's easy to digest, that does provide a bit of carbs, and that then in the morning you feel energizes you enough. Dania, you asked, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, sorry. How can I reduce my intense sweet cravings? So very often sugar cravings come from stress, in terms of that if you are under a lot of stress, if you are not managing to kind of sort of maybe get through some work and you're procrastinating a little bit, if you haven't had enough sleep, if it's maybe a habit, like you always have a biscuit with your tea mid-afternoon, and also if you're not having enough water. So if you don't drink enough water, you often will crave more sugar as well. So if your diet is balanced, if you're drinking enough water, if you're keeping your meals interesting, if you're having enough sleep and managing stress accordingly, that all should help as well. But it's about just putting in perspective and having a better understanding as to why you're craving foods, when you're craving them. So I always think with cravings, it's a good idea to keep a food diary, to record what you've eaten when, and try to kind of then give yourself that ability to have a better understanding. And then that then in turn helps with sort of the best sort of way to manage it. So you have that understanding for yourself. Roland, you asked, I'm always confused with the oils. We all know olive oil is good, but what about canola, coconut, and sunflower? So I'm glad you asked this question, because I just did a presentation yesterday and we had the exact same conversation, because I think that it is so confusing, and I think it's so important for people to have a better understanding. So olive oil certainly would be the top choice, as well as avocado oil. I personally always try to cook with avocado oil because it's a little bit more heat stable than olive oil, but both are good choices. Unfortunately, at least in South Africa, olive oil and avocado oil are both equally expensive, so it doesn't necessarily help in that respect. Of the other three you mentioned, the sunflower oil, I definitely would not recommend. Its balance of the types of fats that it has in it, in terms of the amount of omega-6s it has in it, versus some of the other fats, like the monounsaturated fats, the balance isn't great. So rather avoid the sunflower oil. The canola oil, a lot of it depends on how it's processed. So if you're getting sort of more of a cold pressed canola oil, which does exist, it's actually very close to olive oil in terms of the sort of fatty acid profile and the benefits. So canola oil can be an equally good option and is often more affordable than the olive oil. Coconut oil is sort of like a little bit, there's a little bit of a variation of that, because certainly from the outside of your body, so things like using coconut oil on skin or hair or nails, that has many benefits. In terms of actually consuming it, it's not that coconut oil is absolutely amazing and magical like one may be led to believe. It can still, it's still high in saturated fat. It still can have negative health effects for those people who are sensitive to saturated fat. And certainly I would still choose the olive or avocado oil over that. The coconut oil also, very often you get the refined coconut oil, which is more heat stable, but is then has less potential health benefits, if any. Whereas the more unrefined coconut oil is less heat stable, but potentially may have some health benefits. So I still wouldn't choose coconut oil unless it's for a skin moisturizer. Then Danya, you asked, any fruits be avoided at night when trying to lose weight? No, there's nothing specific from a fruit point of view you should avoid at night. It's just more important just to watch how much fruit or how much food in general you're having at night, and to try as much as possible to limit sort of after dinner snacking. So if you have one apple after dinner, it's fine, but you don't want to have 10 apples in one go, even if it seems like sort of a better choice from a health point of view. Charles, you said, is it true that heating food in the microwave can have side effects or bring cancer-related illness? No, it's not true. There's nothing really conclusive about microwaving. So it's been around for a good at least 40 years now, and no, there isn't anything like that. Naomi, you also asked about the cholesterol and the green tea. Urtio said, is there any relation between what we eat versus belly fat? So a lot of fat distribution, or where the fat is distributed on our body, is genetically predetermined. So if you, for example, are having or if you have a family history of people in your family having more fat stored in the abdominal area or more fat stored in the hip area, or whatever it may be, that's probably where you would see it for yourself as well. Having said that, in terms of that relationship between what we eat and belly fat, it has been found that if our cortisol levels are high, so cortisol is a hormone that helps us with coping with stress. If our cortisol levels are high, that can increase more belly fat. And in terms of increasing cortisol levels, if you're having a lot of sort of the processed foods, and if you having sort of generally an unbalanced diet, that may also have a negative effect on cortisol levels too. So in general, if you're having a balanced, healthy diet, that would potentially help to reduce the risk of belly fat accumulation, but you also can't choose where you lose fat. So if you are trying to lose weight and you have a balanced diet that allows you to lose weight, you will eventually lose from that area as well. You just can't choose to just lose from the one place over another. Then Danya, you said, I want to eat a sweet treat like chocolate cake or a cookie. Is it better for my health to consume it directly after meals opposed to eating it alone between meals? Yes, it definitely is better to have any sort of sweet treats with a meal or at the end of the meal. If you're having protein, fat, and vegetables to start the meal, that helps to sort of cushion the effect of the blood sugar increase effect from that food. So if you, for example, have a salad with some olive oil, and say it's got tuna in it, so you're getting some protein, some fat, some vegetables, that will then help that when you then have, say, the chocolate cake, it will lessen the extent or the extreme sort of effect that your blood sugar would otherwise increase from, basically. So yeah, it definitely can help.
Thank you so much for all of your amazing insights. That was a really, really informative webinar, and thank you so much to our audience for your amazing questions. There have been so many questions that it makes us think that perhaps we will need to do many more nutrition webinars. There will be, like I said at the beginning, there will be monthly webinars on a variety of health topics and on value adds that Hollard Health Insurance offering has. So please just keep track of your emails. We'll be sending you more information. I did see in the questions, there was a question about if the webinar will be available afterwards. We will be uploading it onto YouTube, onto the Hollard YouTube page. So also please just keep a lookout in your inbox for information on that. Finally, if you enjoyed this, please tell your colleagues to join next time. And tell your spouses too. We'd really like to see this growing and share in the wellness information. Yeah, thank you so much, Lila, and thank you to everyone who joined.